everybody, Davey here from Davey's World Fishing. It's a rainy day, it's playoff football weekend, so I'm indoors and I'm going to talk about a few of the baits that I always have tied on for spotty bowl. Stay tuned. Alright guys, I'm a Southern California native and I've been fishing spotted bay bass for close to 40 years. I mean, I look that old, but I'm pretty darn old. We're coming into spotted bay bass season here, which actually happens all year round, so there's not like a full season for these guys. But what it is actually spotty bowl season. The first tournament happened just this last weekend. And people, as we're going into these different tournament seasons, always ask me what baits I have tied on when I'm gonna hop out in the water. So in this episode, I'm gonna run you through a series of the baits that I generally always have tied on. You might have saw one of my videos where I talked about the different setups sitting on the kayak out there on the water, but this one I'm gonna specifically talk about some of the baits I have tied on. I've got everything from deep diving crankbaits to slow pitch jigs to chatter baits to even like a hookup style bait, and of course the A-rig. But I'm going to run through each of these and I'm going to kind of give you a little rundown on how I set it up and how I'm fishing each of these baits. Now, one of the first baits that I want to talk about is the deep diving crankbait, like that guy right there. Most of our local harbors here, Newport Harbor, Alamitos Bay, Marina del Rey, Huntington Harbor, Long Beach, you're going to be at a max depth of right about 20 feet. It could go down to 25 feet, maybe a little bit more in some areas, but most of them are going to be max right about 20 feet, some of that even a little bit less. Huntington Harbor maxes out at around 15 to 18 feet depending on your tide. But one of the baits that I like to have, as I mentioned, is that deep diving crankbait. Something like a Dredger 25, which that one happens to be right there. Now it's listed to dive down to about 25 feet of depth. Now with the different structure that we have in our local harbors here, we're talking about boat moorings, which several of the harbors have several offshore moorings for the boats, and they're sitting in about 15 to 20 feet of water. Then you'll have some of the drop-offs, you'll have some eelgrass, and you have plenty of other structure that's out there in that water. But these dredgers, they dive down fast and they stay in that deep water column where you want them to be. Now fishing these, what I'm generally going to do is I'm going to make a really long cast with this bait and I'm going to grind fast. What that's going to do is when that thing hits the water, because they float and they're very buoyant, it's got a really loud rattle, is when I crank hard, it's going to dig down and it's going to go all the way down to the bottom. It's going to hit the bottom, and then as soon as I feel it hit, I'm going to slow down my retrieve and I'm going to slowly retrieve just enough, fast enough so I can keep it bouncing off the bottom. And it'll bounce, it'll dig, it'll swerve. What it's doing is it's actually digging, hitting that dirt, hitting that structure, and it's just gonna keep bouncing. If you don't feel that, and if you just feel it going back and forth, it's fine as well. Crank it a little bit faster and try to get it down to that bottom. That's gonna stir up some of the muck. It's gonna create a lot of commotion down on the bottom there. And then if you do get hung up, like a lot of times what's going to happen with that hang up is the bill's just going to get stuck under something. It's not that the hooks are actually hooking, the bill's going to get stuck. And with these ultra buoyant baits like that Dredger 25, just stop retrieving. It's going to, a lot of times it's just going to float itself right back up, and as soon as you feel it free, just start cranking again and then you'll get right over that structure and you'll start moving on. But that's one that you always want to have with you. Long cast, you can parallel docks, you can work all of the long parallel lines when you're on those moored boats. But a deep diving crankbait is going to be ideal. And then of course by color, different times of year is going to be completely different as well. I always like something with a little bit of a chartreuse in it, a dark bait, white belly, chartreuse, or even a white bait completely with a chartreuse belly is awesome, generally most of the time of the year. Also, a lot of the red craw baits are going to be great for that deep diving crankbait as well. Definitely something you want to have in your arsenal. Now I mentioned eelgrass in that last segment when I'm talking about that deep diving crankbait. Now one bait I always like is either a spinner bait, a dual bladed spinner bait with either a willow blade or a Colorado blade like the Fish Lab new spinner baits that they have that are out right now. Phenomenal baits, or a chatterbait style bait. Chatterbaits were very popular when I started kayak fishing back in the early 90s, and they're making their way back. A lot of people that have done it and have a lot of success will stick with these and they do very well on them. So what that is there is a chatterbait, which was owned by Z-Man Bait. So you'll see something similar, but this is a Z-Man chatterbait here, is it's got a flat bladed blade on the very front there that's attached directly to the head, and then you got your bait on the back there. So what I have on there, I've got one of the Fish Lab Soft swim bait tails, that's the 3.5 inch. It's got a nice sturdy hook, but then that chatterbait blade. Now what that thing does is this thing makes a ton of movement, a lot of sound, and it's wiggling back and forth, kicking that tail around. You can either fish that with a regular fluke style bait or a paddle tail. I love the soft paddle tails. They seem to get bit very well. But what you're gonna do with this bait is you're gonna make a nice long cast, let it get down to the bottom, and there's just a nice slow retrieve. Maybe give your rod a quick jerk so you can feel that blade actually moving, and you'll feel it move. It'll start digging in there. And then a nice slow retrieve. A lot of times you're gonna feel it get into that eelgrass. Give it that quick jerk and that'll pull it through. That'll get the blades of grass off of there. But a nice slow retrieve. Now another bait to look at in that same exact family is the Googan clickbait. So that's the regular chatterbait, as you can see, and that's the Googan clickbait. Now this bait actually creates a ton of commotion. I love these things in and around shallow eelgrass. So if I'm in an area that's got a big, flat, shallow eelgrass bed, I'm gonna pull out that Googan clickbait and we're gonna make some nice long casts with it. Now I've got that longer bait there. I've got that 5.5 inches. This is also the soft swim bait by Fish Lab. Phenomenal baits, easy to bite, great little body. And that Googan clickbait. Now that bait there, as I said, it's got a ton of commotion. You can see that blade is really free there. It's got a couple ball bearings that actually are free inside there as well. And then you can tie it right on the edge there, and this thing is just gonna kick and it's gonna pull and it's gonna just create a dig and a lot of motion down in the water. These baits, they're also, you can alter them a little bit. As you can see, it's got a free wire that's just on the top of that head there, so you can bend it up, bend it down. If you get a couple fish and you find that it's spreading out, that bait, after you make that cast, will work its way to the surface, then it almost becomes a topwater bait. So you can bend it back down, work it back down there, so it gets back down to the bottom. These fish, especially spotted bay bass, are going to be hunkered down in that eelgrass area. So you want to work this bait right above that eelgrass, right on the top of it. Here's your eelgrass. You want this thing to just be touching that eelgrass and working right along the top of that. They're down there, they're looking, they're going to ambush whatever's going by, and as soon as this thing goes by, they're going to come up and they're going to crush that thing. Phenomenal baits, either that chatterbait or that Googan's clickbait. Check these things out. Now the last baits I want to talk about, I've actually got two different baits here, and they're basically for the same style of fishing. Now this is going to be more of your vertical fishing. This is fishing right along pilings. This is going to be fishing along the lines that the boats are actually moored to out in those harbors. But vertical jigging is basically what this is. The first one I'm going to talk about is going to be your hookup style bait. These are going to be two baits. That guy right there, that's a hookup bait, and these things are vertical style jigs, and phenomenal. They get bit, they glide, they're crazy baits. You can talk about them as much as you want, but they simply get bit. No pride when you're trying to catch these fish, especially in a tournament. These are the ones you want to take a look at and always have one of these guys tied on. Now that's the hookup bait, as I mentioned. They come from very small to actually little tiny trout size, like a 1/32 ounce, all the way up to baits that are several ounces for like big rockfish, lingcod, trips, and things like that. But when working these guys around the docks, all you're going to do is you're going to pull up to that structure, whether it's one of the pilings on the outside of the dock, is you want to just get as close to it as you can, let that bait fall. And when it's falling, it's going to slowly glide and it's going to work its way down to the bottom. It's big circles, it'll be kind of erratic and make its way down. When it gets down to the bottom, if it even makes it to the bottom, but once it gets to the bottom, 1, 2, 3, give it a couple of pops, and if you're not bit, wind that thing in, maybe work the other side of that piling or the other side of the structure. Now on those mooring cans where you're going to see the sailboats and other boats that are moored offshore, not on docks, but offshore, those mooring cans are tied all the way down to the bottom, and then there's some kind of big structure that they're tied to, whether it's old engine blocks or cinder blocks or just chunks of metal, whatever it is. It's a big piece of structure that's actually off of the bottom. Now you've got this big piece of structure that's right above the bottom. Those spotted bay bass and sand bass are usually going to nose right up to it or parallel to it. And they're going to stay as close to it as possible. And as fish come by, they're going to ambush. They're ambush predators, and that's what they're going to do. So on that little hookup bait, there's the big structure, and as it's coming gliding by, when it gets down next to it, that's when those spotted bay bass are going to come up and absolutely crush that bait. But those are hookup baits, working the docks, working those structures, awesome little baits. Now you don't necessarily have to be completely vertical on those things as well. Vertical is where you want to be on a lot of the baits that you're talking about vertical jigging, but with the hookup baits, you can actually make a little cast, make a flick, get it into the docks. A lot of times when you're looking at the dock, you're going to see the big foam that's underneath, but you'll also see an opening. So if you can get your bait, flick it, skip it right underneath that opening and let it fall as well. A lot of times those spotties are also going to be mid-column, but they're going to be on the shadows. They're going to be hiding in there. They're going to come out and ambush that bait as well. Some of the biggest fish I've caught on the spotties have been kind of open water under those docks, not necessarily fixed to structure. But you know, hookup baits, that's the way to go if you're going to fish that kind of thing. Flick that bait in there, let it get under and let it fall. When it falls, it's just going to do some gliding. Let it get down to the bottom on its own. You don't want to do any pressure on it, nothing else. Let it get down to the bottom. 1, 2, 3. Set the hook because you're probably already bit at that point. Now the last bait I'm going to talk about is the other vertical jig. You've heard people talking about slow pitch jigs. You've probably seen some of my videos on slow pitch jigging, but that's what I'm going to talk about today. So I'm going to talk about 2 styles of vertical slow pitch style jigs. The first one is going to be this guy here. This happens to be a 7-gram vertical jig. It's got your 2 assist hooks right on the top there. You can tie it either right to the split ring or right to the bait directly. And as that thing falls, you want to get vertical on those pilings like we talked about, or on the structure above those mooring cans or whatever. Get above it. I usually use a bait caster at this point, but you can use spinning reel as well. Open that reel up, and as it falls, and you want it to be as free as possible. No tension, you don't want your thumb on the spool to slow it down or anything. But as it falls, it's gonna dart. It's gonna move, it's gonna sway, it's gonna glide, and it's gonna fall. A lot of times you're gonna get hit on the fall. Same on the hookup bait, it's gonna be on the fall. So you're thinking you're at the bottom, and all of a sudden your line just starts peeling off. Set that hook and set into it. But that's all you're really doing for these baits. When you get down to the bottom on one of the pilings, get down to the bottom, you'll feel it hit the bottom, engage it, give it 1, 2, 3, as many as you want, just let that thing bounce around, because what's gonna happen is it's gonna pull up off the bottom, and then it's gonna slowly work its way back down. Pull it up, work its way back down. Give it 5 to 10 jerks on each side of that piling. Maybe work the opposite side of the piling depending on which way the current's moving. That's the side that the fish are going to be on. So you want to give it some work, make it self-work there. You're always gonna hope that you could have done it a couple more times, because my theory is there's usually fish on every piling. Whether they bite or not, that's a whole different story. But that's that slow pitch style vertical jig. And the other one here I've got, this is a Fish Lab finesse jig. And it's basically the same style bait, and it's fished almost exactly the same, except it has a big treble hook on the bottom and no assist hooks on the top here. You can pre-rig these with some assist hooks if you like. You can get rid of that treble hook either way you like. You're basically going to fish these the same. You want to get really close to that piling or that structure, open that up, let it fall. It's going to do its darting. It'll get down to the bottom, work it 1, 2, oh, there's one. Set that hook, get into that. And that's what those baits are for. These are actually really effective for even small yellowfin tuna, bonita, and everything else as well. But these guys right here, great little baits. I want to say these guys though start out at maybe like a 20 gram or a 30 gram, and they go up from there because they are a bigger saltwater bait. But they're great, slim. It looks just like a lot of times when you catch that spotty and it's spitting up baits, that's the size and that's the bait that it's kicking out there. And that's exactly what you want to do, is match the hatch, right? Great little baits. So anyway, I just want to give you a little look on what I generally have tied on for my spotty tournaments. Everything from the deep diving crankbait, those vertical jigs, those clicker bait, those all kind of style baits with the swim bait tails. Of course, the A-rig, I didn't show you the A-rig. I've went through the A-rigs ad nauseum on a lot of my videos. And those vertical jigs. I hope this helps you out a little bit and kind of give you an idea maybe what you want to look for if you're trying to get started in spotted bay bass and sand bass fishing. But that's just a small array. You don't have to go real deep into your baits and spend a lot of money, but that's them there. I appreciate y'all checking in. Do me a favor, hit that like button down below and subscribe to Davy's World Fishing up in that right-hand corner. See you out on the water.